Good day, everyone. Welcome to our live webinar, Learn How to Reduce Vulnerabilities with Windows Virtual Desktop. Today, we are joined by industry leaders for us to understand how Windows Virtual Desktop work and its benefits for remote work setup. We have impressive speakers today, and I'm excited to introduce them to you all. Joining us today for the first time ever is Nick Westbrook, Cloud Solutions Architect of Microsoft Asia Pacific. The first 2 decades of his career was spent knowing what it is next and how it can improve or how it can provide benefit to his company, clients, and friends. Nick is awarded multiple times as a Microsoft MVP for Azure, recognized by Microsoft New Zealand as being amongst the technical elite in the local market by being made part of their VTSP Partner Seller Program and being awarded Solution Sales Specialist at their Partner Awards last year. On the roster, we also have Jude Pereira, Infrastructure Services Manager of TechOne Global. Jude is a seasoned IT professional who has been in the industry for more than 9 years. More than being a Microsoft certified trainer, he is also an expert in infrastructure and cloud services. All right, gentlemen, how are you doing today?
Hey, Clarice, I'm great. Thanks. Thank you very much for having me here today. I'm excited to share the day with you guys.
We are too. And that's great to hear. And I'm sure we have an insightful hour ahead of us. So let's jump right to it. Okay. So for the first question, I'd like to address this to Nick. So, Nick, as we know, we have been in a remote work environment for for a very long time already, for many months, right? And when employees access an organization's environment remotely, it can open doors for security threats. And what do you think, or what are the top security threats that users may come across, and how can they be addressed, or how can they be resolved?
Sure, yeah, Clarice. It's been a crazy year, hasn't it? There's so many of us still working remotely. COVID doesn't seem to be going away anytime soon, and we've really seen Windows Virtual Desktop come into play, come into being as a really great service to help companies stay afloat and support their workers working remotely. Um, as you mentioned, though, remote access to corporate environments does pose some inherent risk. If you think about when you're in an existing corporate environment and you're actually in the network, you're surrounded by all this perimeter defense that the IT team administrators have actually put in place to try and protect you.
Right.
When you're working from home, things can be a bit different though. But with WVD, it's great in that it can actually provide this secure bubble within the managed private cloud, that an organization controls. And from an end user perspective, they're literally just sending keyboard and mouse signals into this bubble remotely. So you don't actually have a direct connectivity between the device that you're working on and the back-end corporate line of business applications. It's just this remote streamed environment. So that in itself actually provides a lot of segmentation between the end user world and the corporate world. In saying
R-
that, though, there's still the potential for bad actors to get involved. So while WVD does provide a secure environment, it's still recommended that to adopt a zero trust approach. In that you have different security layers that you can put in place, so that if a bad guy gets through one layer, they come across another layer in your defense. And with WVD, we actually have a lot of this that we can bring to bear. Primarily being conditional access being a great first gatekeeper. So with conditional access, we can actually only allow our end users to connect into the WVD environment from either a location that we trust or from a device that we trust, or from a multitude of different factors that we can assess in the first place. So by utilizing the tools that are available in Azure, we can actually protect the environment from potential malware getting in, or bad guys, accessing the environment from someone's leaked credentials, for example.
Right. Thank you for that, Nick. Anything you'd
No
like to
worries.
add to that, Jude?
Yeah. So I have to totally agree when it comes to what you mentioned. Now, if you look at the COVID situation for the past 6, 8 months, and analyzing the Microsoft Digital Defense Report, which they recently published to general users. So if you look at the report itself, the number of attacks during these COVID times has increased significantly, and majority of these attacks are targeting enterprise level customers. So the main reason is they very well know that there are users who will be accessing from remote workplaces, from their homes or from other places likewise without attending to their office premises. So there's a huge gap when it comes to working from home and then working from your office location. Like Nick mentioned again, uh, security is not the best when you're working at home. For example, let's take this scenario into a physical approach. Now, if you look into your organization, your physical location, your building, there are multiple levels of access. For example, let's say you go into your office, and then the first entry point will be there will be a security person who will be checking whether you are an intended person to come, and then they'll be marking your ID card, and then checking with the reception whether you are allowed to go into this building and then to which floor that you will be needing to go. Now, that's a physical or an approach where they have placed inside the office premises itself. Now, it is the same when it comes to your data, because we're not talking about a physical location, we're talking about your organizational data. And just like you have given priority to your physical location, physical premises security, you need to make sure that anyone who is trying to access your organizational data, they are coming in a secure path, in a secure manner. So that's where WVD comes in, because through WVD, we have multiple levels of control where we can control from the entry point itself and going forward until where you will be grabbing the data or the access controls that you need. So it's just not a single solution with only a single product. We have coupled multiple products within these WVD solutions because we are targeting the entire Azure stack itself with multiple technologies built in to provide a complete, secure remote solution.
Right. And so it's very important that you and Nick mentioned the increase of threats, right? During this time, especially most of the people are still working remotely, right? And you also mentioned about Windows Virtual Desktop having multiple layers of security, which leads actually to the next question. So with this, I'd like to address this question first to Nick. So, Nick, given that we already mentioned the numbers or the multiple levels of security with Windows Virtual Desktop, can we utilize existing Azure Active Directory to provide multiple factor authentication, conditional access, and other tools for Windows Virtual Desktop?
Yeah, absolutely, Chloe. So, one of the great benefits of Windows Virtual Desktop is that it's built on Azure, and it integrates neatly with a customer's existing environment. So it's not like a customer has to go out and buy additional third-party tooling to support multi-factor authentication or other privileged identity access or role-based access control and various other tooling. Um, Typically what we find is that customers more often than not are already using all this great technology that Microsoft provides. They're securing their Office 365 access with Azure Active Directory and conditional access. Potentially having Windows Defender ATP involved and Azure Security Center, for example, configured. Windows Virtual Desktop is just another solution that you can light up in Azure and deploy and integrate with your landscape as it exists at the moment. So for IT administrators, it's actually a really easy learning curve, to roll out Windows Virtual Desktop and manage it within the environment because it integrates so neatly with all these existing tools that Microsoft has available.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's good to know that the ease of access or like the configuration for IT professionals would be very easy, especially now that working remotely, we have very limited access to the employees' devices, right? So that's very
Yeah,
helpful.
exactly.
Given that, well, I'd like to address this to Jude. So, given what Nick mentioned, how can Windows Virtual Desktop help reduce security attacks when compared to on-premise solutions? Because that's most companies have right now.
Correct. So if you look at the on-premise, a traditional on-premise environment, uh, the key components that are built into this environment would be you do have an Active Directory, obviously. And apart from that, you may have access control systems, multiple levels of multiple products itself. So you don't have a specific single solution which integrates all together. But in Azure, we're talking about a complete solution itself. Now, mainly when it comes to the on-premise solutions that we are trying to come up with in terms of securing our environment, especially during this COVID time. Like, let's say uh, 6 months back when COVID started, or rather it's almost 1 year, but let's say 6 months back, we started the COVID work from home scenario. Now, this is a time where an organization needs to focus on how they will be going ahead with their remote working solution. So they need to
Right.
come up with a plan. How are we going to do this? Whatever the on-premise solutions we have, can we cater this solution itself? So most of the organizations, they do not have the capability because for remote desktop solution, remote working solution, you need to have specific hardware and other security levels which needs to be implemented. So in on-premise, the general method would be you need to bring up server hardware and then other security controls and then implement that. And this is going to take time. And this is going to be a huge investment as well because even though, let's say, hopefully COVID will completely get out from our entire world in another 6 months or so, hopefully. And in that case, this new solution that will be coming up to the on-premise environment will only be used for 1 year. So if the organization decides, okay, after 6 months, COVID is over, we are all good to work from office, then all the users will be coming back to office, and that technology that they used, that they invested, will be completely obsolete. So their investment is going in vain. But when it comes to WVD, this is completely Azure-based model where you will be implementing your host tools, remote desktop and applications, and then other policies, security configurations. Everything will be on Azure. The complete infrastructure will be hosted on Azure. And the benefit is we don't have to worry about a long running investment because we're talking about a pay as you go model in most cases. So the customer will be paying whatever they are using. If they decide, okay, for 6 months, I'm going to do this, they're going to pay for that, and then the implementation will come up. And then whenever you decide, okay, I'm going back to office, I don't need this WVD environment, you can shut it down. You will no longer be charged. So that is number one benefit that we see in terms of cost wise. And secondly, when it comes to securing your environment as well, you have multiple levels of access control. Now, for an example, in a journey where we talk about users, or rather users journey from on-prem to cloud environments. So we are talking about different devices, different applications, and risk based on these individual users. So everything is filtered from the cloud approach itself. So you don't need to worry about implementing your hardware and then bringing them for another 2 3 months. You don't need to worry about that. You can set it up probably in a week or so. So
Mm-hmm.
the implementation, the IT personnel, they don't need to worry about the timing. Whenever you decide, okay, I want to have this implemented, just go to your Azure portal, run it up, and then you have a complete brand new fresh environment in the WVD with your desktops and remote applications. So Nick will go through this demo, and you'll be able to see how cool this is and how easy it is for you to implement rather than traditional, less secure on-premise environment.
Right. Well, what's very important with what you mentioned is first flexibility and of course cost efficiency, right? Because that's very important is this in this stage or in this season that we are in right now. So, relating to that, I'd like to address this to Nick, right? So, how given the flexibility that we have for Windows Virtual Desktop, how do we enable role-based administration for Windows Virtual Desktop, Nick?
Yeah, so the short answer is it's actually really easy. And it's enabled by default because Windows Virtual Desktop is a native Azure service.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're familiar with working with any services in Azure, you'll know that Azure Active Directory contains all users and groups that are able to access your Azure environment. And then in Azure itself, we have different roles that can be assigned to these users. So WVD has its own roles, which can actually be which users can be assigned into for doing things like building new WVD environments or managing existing environments. So yeah, really really easy to get going. I'd just like to back up quickly to what Jude was saying earlier as well around the security aspects.
Yeah.
So from my perspective, one of the biggest advantages of running WVD versus an on-premises environment is that it does exist inside Azure. And Azure is actually the most secure and compliant cloud that you can get. The amount of investment Microsoft puts into security is enormous. I think we spend like over $1 billion a year, currently
Mm-hmm.
in cybersecurity operations. We hire some of the best minds, the best security professionals worldwide. I think over 3,500 security professionals at the moment, and their entire job day to day is ensuring Microsoft's assets are protected from the bad guys. And if you think about the assets that we have to protect, everything from Office 365 to Xbox to LinkedIn, to all of Azure itself, MSN, there's all these properties that are huge targets, for malicious actors to try and infiltrate. Um, and all the experience that we get from managing those assets, we can actually bring to bear in protecting Azure. So purely by having your service in Azure, it's automatically way more protected than it would be on premises. And as Jude mentioned, there are a lot of other security products that we can enable, to provide additional layers of security as well within Azure.
Right. So, really, given that what you mentioned with the role-based administration, so related to that is, can we isolate users in both single and multi-session environments? Maybe you can take this on, Nick, and then Jude can add up.
Sure thing. Yeah, so obviously isolating users in a single session environment is super straightforward. So we can have assigned desktops in WBD, which are known as personal desktops, and this is essentially allows us to take a virtual machine in the back end and allocate it to a particular user. So when a user signs in, that's the machine that they get access to. There's no one else signing into that machine, so there's absolutely no way that they can get access to other people's data or work out what they're doing. For multi-session environments, a lot of people have a concern around this, to say if we have 10 or 20 users all signing into the same virtual machine, how can we ensure that they're not going to be able to see what each other are doing? So this was a key tenet of building the WVD service and Windows 10 multi-session. So we've literally crafted almost a new operating system, in Windows 10 multi-session with security at its core. So we've intentionally implemented these safeguards to ensure that user sessions are isolated even in a multi-session environment. So one user's experience and the processes that they're running are not able to be accessed by another user at all.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, there is still shared storage underneath it. So if user one saves something to C drive temp, for example, user two still has the same storage underneath, so they could potentially see that. But within the session, there's absolute user isolation there.
Right. Well, that's very important that we know that there's really a separation, even though users will be using one single virtual machine, right? So, with that, would you like to? I'd like to address the next question to Jude. So, Jude, given that we have already discussed role-based administration and having multi-session environment, so can Windows Virtual Desktop support remote applications? And if so, will it be hosted in a separate environment as well? Can you please explain to us how this works?
Yeah. So in terms of how users will see the user experience wise, they will be having two set of options. One would be they'll be having a Windows Virtual Desktop, and the other option would be they'll be having what we call as remote apps. So these remote apps component is enabling users only a set of applications that they will be required. So we're not in this specific scenario, we are not publishing an entire desktop itself. So the user will log into their portal and the request session. Then they'll be seeing whatever the applications that has been assigned to them. These application controls, when it comes to the backend side, we have a complete control on how we will be deploying these applications into which specific set of users. So that is number one when it comes to segregation and isolating users and their respective applications. And another cool feature which Microsoft has come up with is to make sure that these remote applications and the desktop host. So desktop host has these remote applications running in the backend. So these are two components, and Microsoft has come up with a component, rather a capability, a feature which we call as reverse connect. So with
Mm-hmm.
reverse connect, these connections between remote app host infrastructure components, the IP and ports will be restricted. So you don't need to worry about allowing or enabling your IPs from one remote app component into your desktop host component. So with reverse connect, you don't need to worry about that. Everything will be handled by this feature. And apart from that, so this isolates basically what we call as a troublesome environment or concept that we people might think, okay, I need to open these ports, and will there be a problem if I open these specific ports? Will there be an attack likewise? So we don't need to worry about that. In a traditional on-prem environment, of course, we need to worry, but over here we don't need to. And secondly, uh, earlier we talked about remote apps, but right now we do have something new, which we call as MXIX app attachment. So
Mm-hmm.
with this capability, what Microsoft is allowing is to users have a specific set of applications that will be dynamically available for their access. For example, let's say you have a desktop application, so Windows desktop, a virtual desktop session. So inside this desktop session, you don't have a specific applications pre-installed. Now you may be having a single host where multiple PCs are available, multiple desktops are available, but you don't need to install these particular applications natively. This is
Mm-hmm.
only required for a set of users. So what we can do is we can use the feature or the capability called MSIX, and then we can wrap this specific application and then publish it to the user. So the user experience in this case would be the user will log into the virtual desktop environment like a remote desktop, and then they'll see the MSIX application component. They'll double click it, and then from the backend, the application will be attached to your computer, to your virtual desktop, like a disk will be attached. So if you go to disk management, then you will be able to see this specific application being attached as a disk. So this is where we eliminate the need of publishing unnecessary applications. And if an application doesn't support, of course, we can use MXIX wrapping and then publish to users who will only be needing or requiring. So with these technologies, we are eliminating most of the threats in the sense risk, where users will be enabled with the entire solution itself, the entire
Mm-hmm.
virtual desktop. You can do that. You can only access this specific set of controlled applications. So uh, for user wise, I think that would be an ideal solution in a corporate environment. So you can save resources, and at the same time, you can enable access control as well within the environment.
All right. That is very important, Jude. Thank you for sharing that. So that's the control and the access, and of course the security, because that's very important, right? That's what we are really trying to make sure within all the organizations right now. And so, given that, with the with the clients that you have handled in the past few months, can you share with us few best practices and maybe some case studies that you can share with the audience that we have today? Maybe you can go first, Nick.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I've been involved in quite a few projects, over the past 6 months or so, as you can imagine. Um, and my biggest recommendation when looking to adopt WVD is to get your user profiling correct. So when we deploy or even architect a WVD environment, the virtual machines that actually provide the sessions out to the users are known as session hosts. And these virtual machines can be configured in a million different ways. So within Azure, you're actually able to select any virtual machine in Azure to use as a session host. So that means you can have everywhere from the smallest virtual machine, with like one core and hardly any RAM, right through to the largest machines, with hundreds of gigs of RAM, GPUs, and accelerated networking, and all the bells and whistles that you can imagine. And then also within those virtual machines, you need to install the set of applications that your users are going to be running. Now, if you don't go through the process of profiling your users properly, what you could end up doing is over provisioning your session host environment, your host pools, which would mean that you're actually paying for more resource than you need. So maybe you only have two or three users that need a GPU for the work that they do. Perhaps these are like some architects or designers who need to do 3D rendering, for example. So you don't necessarily want to be, building out 10 to 20 virtual machines, all the same, ensuring that they've got GPUs just to cater for those few users that need them. That would be a real waste of money because you're not going to need that capacity. And the reverse of that is true as well. So if, for example, you under provision, and you say that, I'm just going to have, 10 machines, and they're all, the pretty standard average machines, and we're going to let all of our 100 users sign into this WVD environment, and no matter what they're going to be doing, they're just going to have the same setup. That usually ends up badly, because what could end up happening is that you could end up having one of these designers who really need the performance to do their job properly, and do their 3D rendering and graphical design. Um,
Right.
they're going to be competing for resources on that host with someone who is a regular office worker, trying to be on Teams calls or Excel, for example. So mixing these groups of users usually doesn't work that well. So what we prefer doing is actually doing a profiling period on your user population to work out how many users are in different pools. So you could have your data entry workers, you could have your people who are on Teams calls all day, you have your designers. So there's various groups of users with all their requirements, and actually go through the process of defining what their needs are, before rolling out these session hosts in WVD in Azure. Um, in that way, you reduce the administrative time that it takes to architect and deploy the environment, and you also give your end users a much better experience. Because when they sign on for the first time and it's their first day using this environment, everyone's got high hopes. They've got great
Yeah,
expectations that they've heard a lot of good things and they're really excited to use it. But if you've lumped them together with someone who needs a lot more resource than they do, or there's not enough available on the machine, it's not really going to end up too well. So that
for
would be my
sure.
number one recommendation. Yeah, go through a process, either manually by interviewing your users, or they actually have some tooling available from some of our
Hmm.
third-party partners who can actually do automated profiling against your user population, and it'll give you a nice report at the back of it to say you have these groups of users and these are their requirements, and this is how you should architect your WVD environment.
Right. Thank you for that. So really, profiling, whether be it manually or digitally, right, it's very important so that we make sure we serve the right environment for our users, right? So anything you'd like to add to that,
Exactly.
Jude?
Yeah, definitely. So, in terms of like you mentioned, profiling is key. So, based on this profiling, your entire implementation will happen. So, you need to do this very carefully, and that's where we Tech on Global comes into the picture. So, we'll be able to help you in terms of one-on-one consultation. So, uh, probably identifying your requirement and what are the expected goals and how we can implement them. So that's where we come in. And at the same time, things we need to focus on when you're working with customers. Some of the key factors that we have come across is we need to identify several pillars that needs to be properly addressed. Mainly because if you look at a WBD solution, we are not talking about a complete Microsoft only or complete user or client only solution. So there's a shared responsibility in between. For example, if you look at the backend infrastructure, Microsoft will handle all these infrastructure from their end. But as an organization, as a client, we need to focus on what are the security controls, what are the application level controls that we need to set up from user perspective or an organization perspective going forward. Now, if you look at these specific pillars, where we'll be directly addressing on identity, how you
Mm-hmm.
can protect identity, whether you require MFA, whether you require conditional access, and if so, how we can do that. Because it's not that you're just going in and then enabling MFA and allowing or telling users, okay, all right, go ahead, we have enabled this. That's not the correct approach. You need to plan everything accordingly so that the
Mm-hmm.
user will not experience any issues. Because we're talking about users trying to access their office organization data and organization resources through a remote session. So unlike in an office, you won't be able to contact your IT administrators directly going to the person's desk. So you'll be working from home, and then there'll be tons of problems. So bandwidth requirements and how you can access those kind of scenarios need to be addressed. And another thing is if you focus on conditional access and telling, okay, all right, all the users who are not having their Windows machines updated, they'll be blocked. We can have that. There should be an approach where we need to identify who are the users who needs to be updated in the desktop environments and who will be able to access. So this kind of differentiation needs to be done in the planning session. So we do
Right.
the envisioning and the planning, and then identify what are the components, key components in terms of identity, application, infrastructure, and then networking as well. And at the same time, data, how your data is going to be protected on the cloud. So all of these multiple pillars needs to be addressed one by one. So
Mm-hmm.
if you don't do that, of course, you'll be having a solution, but it's not going to be a proper solution catered to your environment. And you'll be spending unnecessarily, like Nick mentioned, you'll be overspending, and sometimes you won't be able to leverage the true uh, wonders of WVD, which it has proven in the enterprise environment around the globe. And that's why Microsoft is very keen into deploying rather investing in WVD going forward. So key takes from my end, if you ask me,
Mm-hmm.
planning proper, like Nick mentioned, consult, and then make sure that you get everything in place. Going forward, start small, implement basic security controls all the time, go with the security defaults, talk to your partner, and then get them upgraded. So going forward, you have a timeline that you'll be going ahead with these security controls, and finally, there'll be a time where your entire environment will be secured completely, rather than enabling everything in the first go and then messing it up. You just won't be able to access. They'll be complaining. You don't need to have that kind of situation because you want to get this running smooth in your environment
Of course.
it properly. That's the main
Yeah.
key takeaway.
All right. Well, thank you for that, Jude. So it's very important, right? Just to sum it up, as Nick mentioned, it has to be, we have to go through the process of profiling. And then, as Jude mentioned, there has to be really the process of planning very well. And of course, making sure that our pillars are well established. That way, we'll be able to have a secured and compliant environment for all our use specific to all our users, right? Because they differ. And then given that we've actually mentioned the wonders, as to take the word of Jude, the wonders of Windows Virtual Desktop, right? So now, before we open the line for some questions from our audience, Nick will actually be showing us the interface of Windows Virtual Desktop. I'm really excited to see this, and I'm sure our audience will really learn a lot from this as well. Take it away, Nick.
Oh, good. Thanks, Clarice. Let's have a look at the wonders of WVD.
Go
You'll just
ahead.
bear with me for a second while I try and share my screen.
No worries.
Yeah, that one there.
All right.
Okay, looks like we're good. So, as mentioned, WVD is now a completely integrated native service in Azure. And what that means, if you haven't seen it all, or if you potentially saw the old version of it, from 6 months to a year ago, a lot has changed, and it's actually really compelling now. It makes it a lot easier for end users and administrators to access. So straight off the bat, you'll see in the Azure portal, this is where we do all of our WVD work. And you'll see that we actually have this great hub for Windows Virtual Desktop now that we can just click on, and it takes us to all the resources that comprise our WVD deployment. So at the top level, we start with the workspaces. So a workspace is your high-level collection of all the resources that users have available to them. So if we drill down into the workspace, we can see that we have application groups. And in application groups, you'll see that we actually have two types of application groups. So we have remote app application groups and desktop application groups. So Jude mentioned these earlier, where desktop application groups actually present an entire desktop session to the end user. So when they sign in, their screen is overtaken by a remote desktop. Remote app, on the other hand, is where we can actually stream just a particular application out to our end users, which is great. Because if they have a fairly capable machine that they're running from day to day, but they need access to a specific, say, legacy application, or a very high security requirement application, we can stream that application out from Azure to the end user device, and it looks like just a local application that they're running. So in WD, we've got these two options to set up application groups to cater for desktops and remote apps. So within the application groups, you'll see that I've got two desktop application groups and one apps group over here. So in my apps group, I can sign in, head down to applications, and I can see that this is the set of applications when it loads that I actually have available for my end users to stream to their machines. So I've got Notepad, Paint, Snipping Tool, and VS Code currently available. And to add a new application for my users, it's as simple as clicking Add, choosing the application source. So I'm going to say the Start menu on the session host that's underlying this setup. And then I can choose whatever application I want from the session host. So let's say, for example, I want PowerPoint. So I can just go like that, say OK, and then save. And that's essentially it, the process of adding a new application. Right, so I successfully added PowerPoint, and now that will be available to my end users. And I can see under assignments, I can actually choose which users I want to assign these applications to. Yep. So that should come up here. So I actually have a group of WBD users, and then a WBD user 1 account that are actually assigned these applications. So as I mentioned, underlying all of this is the host pool. So a host pool, as it says, is a pool of virtual machine hosts. So I have two pools here. In my pool number one, you'll see that I have two session hosts. And when this loads, here they are. So I've got pool 1 VM0 and VM1. And you'll notice that one of them is available, one of them is not available. So the reason for this is because it's after hours where I am now, and I don't actually need all of my session hosts to be running because my users aren't actually using all of them. So what I do overnight is I actually scale down the capacity to kind of a pilot light. So there's always a machine available for someone to sign into to get their session, but I'm not actually paying for all the session hosts to be running all the time, which is a really great capability of WVD in Azure and something that you can't actually achieve on premises. Right? You can't really turn things off to save money on premises, but you definitely can in the cloud. So if I click into this machine, we'll see that here's a session that I have connected. The size of the machine, standard D2, and there's various tools over here that as an administrator, I can choose drain mode to not allow new connections to this machine if I want to do some maintenance on it. I can click log off all users, which will automatically log them off. I can even send the users a message on the machine. So it's a really great interface, all directly through the Azure portal, really powerful and way better than it was before. So that's pretty much it, from the back end perspective. So these are all the
Mm-hmm.
resources that go into making up, a WVD deployment itself.
Right.
We got to remember that as these resources exist in Azure, there's a lot of potentially supporting resources around it. So particularly for the virtual machines, as the session hosts, they are literally just Azure virtual machines. So they'll need to exist on a network. We may want to put some firewalls in place to protect internet-bound access. And all the other security capabilities that we've been talking about during today's sessions around conditional access, multi-factor authentication, Windows Defender, Azure Security Center, etc. So all of these other resources can be enabled within the WVD environment itself. So that was a quick look at the back end. Let's
Correct.
have a look at the front end quickly. Where the end user gets their experience.
Right.
So WVD has multiple client options available. Right? So we have clients for pretty much everything, right? iOS,
Mm-hmm.
Android, Windows, Mac OS, and even any HTML5 browser. So I've got Chrome opened here, and you can see
Mm-hmm.
if I head to the URL of WVD, which is consistently this URL at the top, rdweb.wvd.microsoft.com, I actually sign into this workspace, and here are all the resources that I have available to me. So if I double click on this remote desktop icon over here, I'll get prompted to see if I want to redirect my clipboard or printer or microphone, to the remote session. I say I don't care about my printer, but I do want my clipboard, and I can go allow. And then what this does is it actually connects to the backend session hosts through those other resources that I just showed you, in the
Mm-hmm.
application group and the host pool, etc. And that will actually establish a connection to my session host. And as Jude was saying earlier, it's actually established through a capability called reverse connect.
Mm-hmm.
Whoops, let's try that again. Which means that I don't actually have to have inbound ports available on my session hosts, which greatly reduces the surface attack area. The connection is actually established from the session host out through the broker, and connects me to my session, through that intermediary control plane, rather than me going directly from the internet through my resources into the machine itself. So here I am. So I'll just log in here,
Mm-hmm.
and hopefully within a couple of seconds, we should have my desktop environment.
I think there it
Um,
is.
there it is. Yeah. So there it is, right? Directly in a web browser from any HTML5 compatible web browser. Now I can get access to my corporate resources. So, and once I'm in here, it's exactly as you'd expect. All right, so it's a complete Windows 10 environment. I have my start menu, all my applications. I can open Excel if I want. There it is, Open Edge, and it's exactly what I expect, right?
Right.
Yeah. And then, when I'm done, I can literally just close this session, quit out of my browser here, and then I'll quickly just show you the actual Windows 10 client. So this is the fully fledged client, right, which is a much better way of connecting to your WBD environment
Mm-hmm.
because it supports a lot more capability and a lot more functionality, through the full desktop client rather than through the web browser. So, in this client, here's that remote desktop session that I
Mm-hmm.
was connected to. And on the left, these four icons here are actually the remote applications that you saw I had published earlier to my user. So
Right.
what I can do is I can actually go and refresh my feed, which will query the resources I have in WB again to see if there's anything new available for me. So refresh is in progress. Shouldn't take very long. So there you go. Refresh is completed. Well, it's still going, but you can see that PowerPoint has now jumped in to my demo workspace because that's that new
Right.
application that I just published. So you can
Correct.
see it straight there. Yeah. Um, so then let me try open one of these. So say, for example, I don't want to go directly into my complete desktop environment, but I want to access Notepad remotely.
Mm-hmm.
I can just double click that Notepad app. It's going to initiate remote connection, securing the connection. Almost there. Configuring the remote session. And hopefully in a few seconds, we should have Notepad open.
There it is.
And there it is. Let me just check. There, I just need to scroll it up. There we go. So this is
Okay.
Notepad. So you can see this from my actual machine. I have a remote application opened, and
Mm-hmm.
I can type some content into it and save it. And when I click save, the save dialog actually shows me what's available on the remote machine. So this isn't my local laptop that I'm presenting from. No, this is my
Right.
WVD session host. Yeah. So I can go into my OneDrive folder, and call it demo text and save, and that's it. And then when I want to close the session, I literally click close, and my remote app is closed. So you can
Right.
see, yeah, if I have a really demanding application, or if I have a lot of security requirements around that application that I don't want to install on an end user device, I can just stream it directly from WVD, and it's a great compelling use case, for customers.
It is, it is. And
So
actually,
that's about it.
looking at it, it's really great that, from a remote setup, you'll be able to access your Windows 10, actual Windows 10 platform or interface, right? And as for a user's perspective, the ease of access and how you'll be able to just went ahead or just do what you need to do. It's very easy to few clicks and then you'll be able to access your all of your applications, right? And so that's pretty cool. So now we actually have some questions in already. Thank you, by the way, Nick, for allowing us to see the back end and the user's end for Windows Virtual Desktop. That's really
My pleasure.
helpful for us and for the audience, right? So we actually have here a question, and we'd like to I'd like to address it to both of you, right? But maybe Jude, you can take this on first. So this is a question from Audrey Neville. So her question is, what are the hidden costs we need to take into consideration when planning a budget for Windows Virtual Desktop, or are there any? So would you like to take this on first, Jude?
Yeah, thank you Audrey, for the question. Actually, this is one question which I'm pretty sure most of the client and the customers would love to.
Agree.
So when it comes to hidden cost, there are no such hidden costs if you plan it properly. So when it comes to the planning, that's where you need to identify what are the main features or the requirements that you are having to enable with WBD. For example, let's say license perspective. If you have 365, E3 or E5 and Windows 10 Enterprise, likewise, you will be eligible for WBD. And apart from that, there are additional capabilities. If you're going ahead with the conditional access and then other security features, you might need to have Active Directory Premium and then Sentinel. Apart from that, endpoint protection likewise. And at the same time, when you do the profiling, you will be able to identify uh, how much of storage requirement is required, how much of virtual or hospitals are required likewise. So there are no hidden costs. If you do the planning properly and you identify the exact requirement, and then you'll be able to clearly map on the cost component. Nick, anything from your end?
No, I mean, I'd 100% agree, Jude. No, there are no hidden costs. Even if you go to the Azure pricing calculator and choose to price up WVD, there's actually a fairly detailed breakdown of all the components that you need to keep into consideration. Things from the actual compute running the virtual machine session hosts, through to some remote storage for hosting your FS Logix profiles, perhaps if you're going to be using that, through to egress bandwidth out of Azure, and Azure Firewall potentially for securing your perimeter. So all of that is actually shown to you. And the only, I'd say there are potentially some unexpected costs that customers may not anticipate. But given that it is just an Azure IaaS environment, anyone who's used to pricing up, virtual machines and networks and storage, etc., in Azure should have a fairly good idea on pricing for WVD. And again, the control plane access itself is actually completely free. So those resources I showed you in the Azure portal, the workspace and the host pools and the application groups and the gateway and all of that, it's completely free. It's covered by your eligibility licensing if you're already running M365, E3, E5, A3, A5, etc. It's just the compute for the session hosts and the supporting other infrastructure that you'd be paid for.
Okay, great. Thank you for that, Nick and Jude. We got another question here from Ruwan Fonseca. So his question is, can we configure the application like Fast React access remotely without any delay? Would you like to take this on first, Nick?
I must say I'm not familiar with what Fast React is, but essentially, the way to access applications remotely is just the way that I've showed you on the screen now. So I mean, presenting Notepad as a remote app is probably a bit underwhelming, you could say. No, but it just goes to demonstrate that sort of any application that you can run within Windows 10, you can present out remotely to your end users. So, the question of whether there's any delay or not, of course, there's going to be a bit of delay. There's going to be a few seconds for it to actually load and establish the connection so you can get using it. But once that connection is established, latency between the end user and the backend can be fairly low, depending obviously where your users are in the world and where you've deployed your WVD environments in Azure.
Great. Thank you for that. Anything you'd like to add, Jude?
No, apart from what you mentioned, yes. So we of course can publish it, and when it comes to the network latencies and delays, one key component in terms of that can happen a delay is probably end user internet connection speeds, because when
Right.
it comes to Azure, there won't be any problems at all. So in terms of user access, we need to identify, we need to get statistics on the existing bandwidth and what are the key components of this particular delays. So there are
Mhm.
additional tools we can use to isolate these kind of concerns if the users are having this type of delays going forward. But apart from that, if you have the connections, it will be all cached, and then it's just compression levels, which will be doing the next parts on data transferring.
All right. Thank you for that, Nick and Jude. So, thank you for all the insights and the experiences you've shared, right? Well, unfortunately, that's all the time that we have left. And if you have any other questions that you'd like, that we have yet to answer, feel free to drop them here, in the comment section, either on YouTube or on Facebook. Or you can send them directly to Aliana at techlandglobal.com and we'll get to them for sure. But before we go, if you want to make sure that your business is ready to face whatever unexpected disasters or unforeseen events, you can book a free one-on-one consultation with us for your remote work services, especially for Windows Virtual Desktop. We have our experts on board, and we'll be happy to assist you with your remote work solutions that you need for your organization. And that's it. Thank you very much, Nick and Jude, for your time today, for joining us. And of course, thank you to our audience for tuning in as well. And we hope you enjoyed this conversation we had today. And of course, we look forward to seeing you in the next one. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you.